Good morning, News Talk 1330 WLBB. It's 8:31. And honestly, I'm still not real sure what we're talking about today. I've got a couple of things I do want to touch on for sure. We'll just kind of see where it goes from here. Hope you're having a wonderful morning so far. But I saw a couple of things yesterday that made me kind of angry. Maybe not angry. I don't ever really get angry, but just frustrated, I guess, at watching the news. And really, I think that politics in this country, economics, all of it, has really just been dumbed down. The way politicians campaign about it has been dumbed down. The way the government looks at things has been dumbed down and changed. It seems that over time, or maybe it's just this administration, I don't know, honestly, but it seems like they're being purposely deceptive. I mean, the way we calculate unemployment changed under the current administration. I don't know if you know that. I've mentioned it before on the program, but newsflash, the way we calculate unemployment has changed under the Obama administration. It's one of the first things he did when he stepped into office. Imagine that. What used to happen, the way I understand it, is that the states were in charge of that. Mark Butler, for example, in Georgia would obviously be in charge of the Labor Department and those findings and things like that. Well, that information was then passed up from the states to Washington, D.C., and then Washington, D.C. did what they wanted to with those numbers. It was a very open process, and with 50 different states participating, you had a much greater likelihood that they wouldn't have any real reason to change the numbers or calculate them differently. But the administration decided they would start doing the data. And what's interesting is if you look at the way we calculate unemployment now, which I believe unemployment's around 8.2%, which isn't terrible by any standard, but it doesn't mean the economy's doing very well, especially with the employment numbers we see every month. We're supposed to, in a healthy economy, we create between 250 to 300,000, and maybe as many as 400 to 450,000 jobs per month. Well, I think last month, let's see, I had it pulled up here. Last month, 170,000 jobs, maybe. That number not quite official yet until today. Stock futures are kind of flat this morning. And last month, I believe we only had 120,000 jobs created. And what I've mentioned before, it just changed. Drudge Report just updated. It's only 115,000 jobs this month. So we're well below half what we need to keep up with population growth when it comes to job growth. Now, if we look at recessions in history, I've mentioned many times in this program, if we look at recessions in history, and the way recessions are determined is by the level of gross domestic product, the level of GDP in a country. And if we look at the current recession, when it officially began, and to where it is now, if we look at gross domestic product growth, it's very, very tragic is about the best word I can look at it. If you look at the Kennedy recovery, if you look at the Reagan recovery, if you look at the Coolidge recovery, if you look at even the Bush recovery, it was slightly better when it came to gross domestic product. And if you look at unemployment, every recession in the past that I can think of, all of the common ones, the Coolidge one, the Kennedy recovery, even the FDR recovery, which was large part in thanks to World War II and the fact that most of the factories and businesses and industry and morale of the entire continent of Europe was destroyed in World War II, is why aggregate demand shifted to the United States. That's a story for another time. I really don't understand why people believe so steadfastly the numbers that the government gives them. And I don't believe numbers that anybody gives me. I just like to find numbers from elsewhere, wherever they may be. But just because I honestly do not trust the government because it's so politicized. Remember that these people are all completely self-interested. I'll give you a prime example. And I don't want to dog the Carrollton City school system, but I attended a very interesting meeting last night, a community forum for parents of the Carrollton City school system. And the interesting thing that I learned before the end of it is that while there was a fairly limited attendance, I think, due to the weather, they've had 120, 130 people there before. I've covered that type of meeting before. The one thing that concerns me is that with this type of meeting, I was, I guess, kind of delighted that of the 4,000 plus students that attend the Carrollton City school systems, I think it's around 4,400 students. It's a lot of kids that go to that school. And this was a elementary, junior high, middle school, high school, everything, alternative school meeting. It was for all parents of all students of Carrollton City schools. And I thought it was kind of underwhelming that we maybe had 40 people there last night. I was like, really? 1 in 100 parents. Or, one person for every 100 students was there. And I knew a number of them were staff as well. Well, lo and behold, in the question and answer session that followed, there were introductions done, and of those 40 people, there must have been at least 20, maybe as many as 30 people there in the crowd that were teachers, assistant principals, assistant superintendents, whatever they may be. And I was just astounded that of the crowd, the people who were actually not staff members of the school or the city school board, there were maybe half a dozen, as many as a dozen parents there. You've got to be kidding me. I just couldn't believe it. And not to knock Carrollton City Schools at all. I'm just saying that that's the type of environment that we have. And I think it's across the country. And Carrollton City Schools is a phenomenal school. I mean, if you heard the news story this morning, I will not deny for a moment that Carrollton City Schools is one of the best schools in the state. That goes beyond the shadow of a doubt. I was educated there. I'm not going to knock my alma mater. I enjoyed my time there. I do think high school is certainly a bit too easy from my own personal stance, but generally speaking, it's a very good school. We have a good graduation rate, all that. I'm not going to get into those details, but the environment we've created here is that people just don't care. You know, I know a lot of people are working and don't have time to come to these types of meetings, but you would think with 4,400 students, more than a dozen parents would show up to something where parents can have input into what happens with their students' instruction, with what happens with technology in the classroom, all of the topics that were to be addressed there. It was very well organized. I think the city school board did a fantastic job of organizing things. There was a beautiful handout that was well explained with good descriptions on what we would discuss. People would be able to go into different rooms and talk with different specialists that do certain things at the school, whether it be working with at-risk kids, the head of technology for the school systems, the nutritionist for the cafeteria school system, which, by the way, Carrollton City School Systems has one of the healthiest lunch rooms, I believe, now in the state, if not the country. An award-winning cafeteria. I remember the food being all right when I was in high school. I don't know how much it's changed in the 6 years since I graduated back in 2006. So, again, I'm not trying to knock the school at all. I'm just saying, really, 10, we'll call it 10 parents show up of the 4,400-ish students that attend the Carrollton City School System. That just blows my mind. I don't care how good the school system is. I think more parents should be concerned about what's going on with the school because there is always something to improve. And Dr. Kent Edwards, the city school superintendent, has always said this. There's always something to do better. Even if we're doing okay, that doesn't mean we shouldn't improve it. I like Dr. Kent Edwards a lot. I think he's a swell guy. Now, I don't think he'd agree with me at all politically, but I think he does a very good job with what he's got and working under the current system. But there's a couple things I want to touch on before I get into... one more thing I saw yesterday, we'll talk about Obama's campaign rhetoric. I'm not sure what to call it. I don't want to call it deception quite, but it's misleading and almost juvenile. You won't believe this advertisement. I'll have to describe it to you. This is a campaign piece from the Obama-Biden campaign. Back after the break, we'll talk about this piece. It's absolutely stunning. Stay tuned. Good morning. It's 8:40. The telephone number 678-601-8255. And a couple of things I wanted to jump into before I get into all this, before I sound like I'm going crazy. The couple of things that made me a little frustrated yesterday was some of the discussion about Social Security, government programs, things like that. I wanted to kind of touch on those before I get out of here this morning. And one thing I did want to look at was Obama's campaign rhetoric is about the best name I've got for it. And this is a serious ad that I saw yesterday on the internet. It's called The Life of Julia. She's a new person, a new fabricated individual who's supposed to be this distraught person who would be much worse off without President Obama and very much worse off if Mitt Romney were elected. And this is a direct aim from the campaign. I mean, Obama is totally sold that Romney is going to be the candidate. And I guess most of the American people are by now, too. But anyway, it's got a picture of Julia sitting here in a doctor's office, and it's got a little caption. It says, "Under President Obama, Julia decides to have a child. Throughout her pregnancy, she benefits from maternal checkups, prenatal care, and free screenings under health care reform. Under Mitt Romney, health care reform would be repealed." And that's it. And the connotation is that without health care reform, Julia would not get checked up at all. She wouldn't receive natal care. And she wouldn't be screened at all because they aren't free. And Julia might die, and her child might die. The world would be a tragic end if healthcare reform were repealed. Julia would just not be able to have her child. It's so annoying. I don't understand it. It's extreme. It's nothing but demagoguery. People act as though before Obamacare, people didn't get prenatal care or free health care or free screenings under their insurance policies or maternal checkups paid for by the government. You know how many babies nowadays are born under Medicaid? I don't understand it. I think this ad is really indicative of the nature of the mind of the general American public. I think, and call me a conspiracy theorist, but I think public education in general, not here in Carrollton, we've already been through this. I think public education in general across the country is downright awful. I don't think public education is such that people graduate from high school knowing anything about local government, knowing anything about state government, and definitely knowing nothing about national government. You would think that a government school, because they are not public schools, call them what you want, but government schooling is what they should be called. Period. They're not a public school, they're a government school. Microsoft is a public corporation. It's not a government corporation. It's government schooling. You would think that a government school, you would somehow walk out of a government school knowing something about government. And they know nothing. Most people know nothing. Most people fresh out of high school fail a basic civic aptitude test. Fail. I mean, less than 50% of 100. I think the average score is like 40. It's downright scary. But this is the mindset that, I really think that this type of campaign logic, this type of message is really catered to the political atmosphere, the climate, whatever you'd like to call it. I really think it's indicative of who the American people are today. I think it's dumbed down because the American people are dumbed down. I really do think we are under the asymptote, that part of the curve in human progression where we are improving at a slower rate than we once were. We're still improving, albeit very slowly. But I believe we're under that asymptote, that point in the graph where we start to grow more slowly, where the exponential growth has disappeared, is the part where we get complacent, the part where we don't care anymore, the part where we believe everything our politicians and elected officials tell us. And that goes for Republicans and Democrats too. I can tell you, I won't name names, but I've heard stump speeches from politicians who've come to classes to speak, or politicians that I've covered at meetings. And as someone who studies political science and economics, who's studied in depth issues like gun control, the role of government, American political thought, that politicians especially have a very warped lens when it comes to issues like that, and they're oftentimes very misleading. And the reason they are that way is because they can get away with it, because we don't know enough. We simply don't know enough in general. Now, my audience obviously excluded from that. I mean, people who listen to talk radio are generally pretty smart people. It's the ones that drive down the road every day and listen to music. And there's nothing wrong with music. Don't get me wrong, I love music. But the people who drive down the road and listen to music have never opened a newspaper in their life. I mean, just think about those people who get out of college and never pick up a book ever again. Or the only books they do read are books like Twilight. How is that productive to the human intellect? If you just go to work every day, you wash windows or whatever it is you do for a living, and you go home, you watch some TV, you watch The Voice on television, you kiss your kids goodnight and go to bed. Now, if that's all you want in life, I totally understand. But keep this in mind. I think we reap what we sow. And if we don't pay attention to the political process is going to pay attention to us big time. Generally speaking, laws do affect everybody in some way, shape, or form. And if we aren't active, if we aren't paying attention, we have to. And I'm not trying to rally a cry to be active. I'm just saying that I can't believe this advertisement coming out of the Obama campaign is sitting here before my eyes. It is nothing but extremist rhetoric based in little truth at all. It's the whole thing about throwing grandma over a cliff. Democrats and Republicans have made the same argument that either party is going to change Medicare such that grandma is going to die. She'll be out on the streets eating cat food. That we always paint our arguments with the extreme, and politicians are the best at it. That's how they make their living, is being extreme. And we've become more and more polarized over the years, and I think that's a good thing, but a lot of people disagree with me. I think moderation is for the losers, to be perfectly honest. But this is what we face today, is that people want us to moderate ourselves and that extremism is bad. But I'm here to tell you that extreme freedom is not bad. And you know it. You know it in your heart, just as I know it in my heart, that freedom is not bad. Even extreme freedom. However you'd like to define extreme freedom. I'm not saying we should be anarchists or anything. But as free as possible without harming others directly is my motto. If I don't do you any harm, I don't owe you anything. You've got no damages to seek from me just because you are incapable. And that's the way I kind of see things. We'll be back after the break and talk about one more thing that kind of made me angry yesterday. And this whole talk about, social programs are the topic, along with the economy, going into the presidential race. In the next 5 years, that's going to be it. The economy. Social programs. Why? Because social programs are ruining the economy, according to me. Back after the break.
I was marching to the wrong drum with the wrong scum, missing out the wrong.
Alrighty, and yet they're all wrong. That's why I played Depeche Mode, because they're all wrong, all those politicians out there. Well, except the ones in Australia. I don't often agree with Australian politicians, but I do when it comes to government retirement programs. Much like Chile, I've talked about Chile before. Chile, much like America, has a social security system. It is a compulsory retirement disability system, and 30 years ago, it was very much like ours, where it was a pay-as-you-go type system. Well, it was very difficult, but 30 years ago, Chile decided that they would privatize it. Everyone would have their own individual account that was for them, and when you died, you gave it to your kids. And when you retired, you could spend it all you wanted. It belonged to you, very much unlike our Social Security system. You can pay $500,000 into Social Security by the time you're 50. If you get killed in a bus accident, too bad. Your kids don't get a dime. But that's not how it's set up, but that's how people think about it. I mean, they think about it like it's a retirement account, and it's not. It is insurance against old age and disability is what it is. And that's one of the big problems with it. I think, here we are, we have kids graduating from government schools, and they can't tell you what Social Security is. If people knew what it was, they might actually save money. But there's two big differences, and today I wanted to tell you about Australia as opposed to Chile to make things a little different. There's two very serious problems with America's Social Security system, and if you listen to those on the left, I had an argument with somebody yesterday about this. Medicare is the big problem, they said, not Social Security. Social Security is fine. And I said, well, you're wrong. I mean, you can believe the Congressional Budget Office all you want, but remember, there are politicians who are making those numbers. So, like I said, believe them all you want. That's all good and dandy, whatever helps you sleep at night. Our system is bankrupt. $30 trillion. That's more than twice. Or, excuse me, just below twice. Near as makes no difference, twice the national debt, which took us 230 plus years to acquire. $30 trillion in unfunded liabilities in Social Security. I believe last year was the first year that Social Security paid out more than it took in. And it's only going to get worse because we're still in the very beginning of the baby boomer generation retiring. The other crisis that the Social Security system has is that it gives workers a lousy level of retirement income compared to the amount of taxes they pay during their working years. Younger workers are particularly disadvantaged, as are African Americans, because of their lower life expectancy. The only demographic in the entire Social Security system who gets a positive gain from Social Security are white women, because they're the only ones who live long enough and make enough money to get a positive gain from Social Security. And these are big issues. So let's start by looking at numbers in Australia, where workers set aside 9% of their income in personal retirement accounts. 9%. Which is less than we set aside in the United States, and they have a lot more money when they retire. This system, which was made universal by the Labour Party beginning in the 1980s, has turned every Australian worker into a capitalist and generated private wealth of nearly 100% of gross domestic product. The private wealth in Australia has been over 100% of gross domestic product. As a matter of fact, it was in 2007. That is absolutely ridiculously good to have private wealth greater than your country's gross domestic product. That's unbelievable. The system has been an outstanding success. I mean, if you look at the trend, starting in 1983, private wealth was 18% of gross domestic product. And by 2007, just 5 years ago, it was over 100%. Private wealth grew immensely. It was a compulsory savings mechanism. America's Social Security system produces huge debts and deficits in the budget, which have to be paid back by who? Us. And private wealth does not grow under Social Security. These are treasury bonds. They're in a trust fund, supposedly. When you save your Social Security money, it goes into government bonds, which have very low rates of return. Where Australians, they invest in the stock market. And the thing is that the stock market, for all the rap it gets, is the most reliable way to get wealthy and have a successful retirement, period. It is the only way you can do it. The average, the worst 40-year trend in the S&P 500 is 12% return. That's about 12% better than Social Security for most people. 15% if you're a black male. That is the worst 40-year period in the S&P 500. Even if you wanted to retire 5 years after the Great Depression, you still would have made 7 or 8% on your returns. That's better than the current Social Security system for most people. When it comes to your retirement, I'm not going to get into disability, since disability is like 30-something% of what Social Security is, which most people don't understand either. $30 trillion in unfunded liabilities. It is time that America wake up and start paying attention. I mean, countries around the world are competing for the success of their people. And in a competitive market, you should look at what your competitors are doing correctly and maybe implement it a little bit. So, for example, Singapore, I mentioned the other day, spends a fifth of what we do on healthcare, yet they live 8 years longer. They have a better infant mortality rate. They have higher cancer survival rates in Singapore. And while no system is perfect, they do have a universal system. And again, it is compulsory. It's a weird mix of consumerism, kind of a libertarian ideal, and compulsory social policy. But it's a weird government partnership between the private and the public sector, much like Australia's Social Security system. Our Social Security system has no savings. It discourages people from setting aside income. The marginal savings rate in this country, I think during the recession, it's up to 3%, which is really high. It's usually about 2% or 1%. The marginal savings rate in China, one of the poorest countries in the world with huge gaps in wealth equality, the marginal savings rate's like 17% or something ridiculous. Australia's superannuation system doesn't have anything akin to America's unfunded liabilities. The closest thing to an analogy would be the safety net provision guaranteeing a basic pension to people with limited savings, presumably because of a spotty employment record. So should Australia be looking at us and say, hey, look, Americans are really happy with Social Security. Look, they aren't trying to change it. Maybe we should copy it. Well, wait a minute. Private wealth in Australia has multiplied by 5 in 20 years thanks to Australia's private retirement system. It's a compulsory private retirement system, but like I said before, what do you think it would do to the economy if all the people who were investing in, I hate to call it investing because it's not, if all the people who were paying Social Security taxes had a choice of where that money went? If I could say, I want my Roth IRA to be filled up with my Social Security payments each month, that'd be, I mean, for me, it's like 70 or 80 bucks a month that I pay in Social Security taxes. But more than that, if you consider the portion my employer pays, which reduces my income over time. I mean, really, it'd be more like 150 bucks a month that I could put in a Roth IRA starting at the age of 15. And if you put in that kind of money, even if it was just 150 bucks a month in a Roth IRA and a nice safe stock index, you are guaranteed to have millions by the time you're 65. The key is starting when you're young, and that's what the Social Security system does. It starts when you're young. But there's no savings in Social Security. It is broken. It will continue to be broken. I'm not sure it'll ever get fixed, but you know how to fix it because other countries have. Australia's fixed it. Singapore's fixed it. Chile's fixed it. We got to wake up and take lessons, in my opinion. I hope you enjoyed the program. Just things to think about. Don't trust what your friends tell you, right or left. Do the homework yourself. Don't trust what Fox News tells you. Be skeptical. There's nothing wrong with being a little skeptical. God knows it's gotten me where I am.